This is the 5th step in our van build series, cabinets.
The overall plan is to build a tall cabinet, floor to ceiling, right behind the driver's seat. And then from here back to about here, we're going to do a countertop, and the fridge will sit underneath. So I've modeled everything up on the computer, and I made a cut list of every panel we're going to need. So we're going to cut those out first before we start assembling.
In addition to forgetting to turn the mic on, Andy cut out a cardboard template. This was really important because the vertical panels need to sit flush with the wall. We used the scribing method we've mentioned in other videos to get the template as close as possible to the exact shape. Once the template fit, we laid it on the cabinet plywood and traced it. Then we used a jigsaw to cut out all the pieces. We wanted to make sure that the cabinet didn't interfere with the driver's seat, so Andy moved it all the way back and put a decent recline in the chair before we did a final fitting.
So this is the template we used for the forward partition here. I got it mocked up where the second partition would go for our floor to ceiling cabinet. I was assuming they would be the same, but I was wrong. So there's a big gap here at the top as the roof gets higher as we go farther back. And there's a gap here on the side. You may not be able to see it too well, but there's a gap between the paneling and the edge of the template, about an inch. So we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna make up that gap.
Measure like 2 more inches up, and then give me like 2 more measurements up from your 3 inches.
There's a lot of engineering talk going on here, so I thought I'd simplify. They decided to work with the gap as if it were a triangle, even though it had a slight curve. They took height and depth measurements at multiple points, which gave them a rough estimate of the size. They then took a scrap from the first piece, laid those measurements out along the curve that was already going to be a perfect fit to the template.
It's in there perfectly.
It's in there perfect?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I can't even see light. I can see light where the little mullions are, but that's it.
Now that they had a perfect gap filler, all they had to do was add that piece to the first panel and trace it and then cut it out.
So we got all the pieces cut and scribed into the van. The next step we're going to work on is installing a spacer at the top of the tall cabinet, and then we're going to install a support rail across this lower cabinet that's going to support the countertop. So Andy, my friend Andy, not me, figured out a clever way to attach the vertical portions of the cabinet to the roof bracket. So we're getting this flat piece of metal. We'll screw it to the top of this board here and slide it in. And then we can run screws right into this rib. You can see the bolt right up there. So this is all bolted into here. And the cabinet is screwed into that. So that provides a nice sturdy surface for everything to mount off of. From first glance, this may look like everything is a little overbuilt, and it kind of is overbuilt. With 2x4s bolted to the floor, bolted to the wall, 3/4 inch cabinetry. There's a reason for that.
And we're bolted to the ceiling
And
too.
bolted to the ceiling as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that, and that is if we ever get into an accident, that some lighter weight construction could fall apart. That if you get in an accident, something that probably weighs 100 pounds could weigh 1,000 pounds or 2,000 pounds. You could see up to 20 G's in an accident. So you would want everything you build into your van to be really well secured. Not just to support its own weight and whatever you're going to put on it, but 10 to 20 times in excess of what it may weigh. The exact size of the door is first set up from your hinge. So there's a couple different types of hinge. There's this one that's designed for a frameless, aka there's no face frame like you would have in like a typical house kitchen. And this is a partial overlap. So the door does not fully overlap the frame. You can tell because there's this gap here. Part of the reason to do that is we wanted to have this nice gap. It makes cutting your doors easier and fitting them easier. And it also provides a little space for the door to open up, and it makes the hinges a little simpler. So these are a 3/4 inch overlap hinge. So to cut the doors, we first measured the inside dimensions of the cabinet, then added 3/4 of an inch onto each side. Mounting the door to the carcass is pretty straightforward. Since your overlap is set by your hinge, only thing you need to do is set the height of the door. So to do that, I stuck a piece of plywood underneath to set the gap, and then I used a straight edge to make a line across the cabinet carcass and onto the door. And I've done that in 2 spots, one at the top and one at the bottom, to correspond with the 2 hinge locations. So once that was done, I took the door away and I drilled with the template that came with the hinges. Your box of hinges will have this little piece of paper, so don't throw it away. And that has a template to tell you where to drill the holes in relationship to the center line that you scribed. So you'll drill your holes, drill your counter bore. Then there's a second piece of the template for mounting onto the carcass. So you'll tape that in place to correspond with your center line and drill the 2 holes. You'll do that for all your hinges. Once that's complete, you pretty much screw your hinges in place and you're done. You'll see there's a couple screws here and here. What these do is they allow you to adjust the door from your point of view, forward and backwards. So then you can use those to adjust the gaps around your door to make sure everything's nice and even. The last steps in the cabinet build is to sort out how we're going to mount the fridge into the cabinets. We're not using a traditional 12-volt fridge, so it doesn't have a flange like the RV or boat fridges do. This is just a standard dorm fridge. We'll talk more about this and how it's going to work in a later video on the electrical system. But we tossed around ideas like ratchet straps over it and welding tabs to it. But my friend Andy came up with a really clever idea to simply glue a board to the side of the fridge, and then when it's slid into place, we can screw into this board from the neighboring cabinet. I'm going to cut out this little section here so when the sink sits into the countertop, it'll have enough clearance to drop down. We have these screws here. We're going to screw up through these support brackets up into the countertop here, and then again at the far side. As you can see, there's a little gap across the top here, and there's one on the opposite side, and that's to let air in to the fridge. And because there's that gap, I can't toe screw like I did on the back, so we have this little metal bracket that will screw into the vertical and into the countertop. When running screws into end grain, you're going to want to use a pretty long coarse thread screw going into the end, versus when you're going across the grain, you can get away with a smaller fine thread.